All right, I'll try not to lie too much. I'll probably lie a little bit. If you think I'm lying, just put your hand up and call bullshit on me. And yeah, you're right, I'll lie a lot. I don't really want to just talk at you guys for like 45 minutes. That's probably kind of a shitty presentation. I can go over a little bit about Imperial and what we do, why we do it. I assume you guys can read pretty good up here. Is that good? Okay. Find a buddy if you can't. Got a little sheet. It's just kind of a little bit about us, and then the back end of it is. Anybody need that? The back end is just kind of tests that we recommend for both homebrew and commercial. Just so I can kind of gauge crowd a little bit. Anybody industry and commercial brewers? Semi? Anybody brew way too much here? Okay. Anybody, how many all grain? Sorry. Anybody never brewed a batch of beer before? Okay. Cool. And then, honestly, I'd rather just open it up for questions. So if you guys have questions on fermentation, beer, anything like that. I also run a mobile canning and bottling company, so if you want to talk about canning or packaging your beer, I can probably talk about that a little bit too. So I got into the industry probably 10 years ago or something like that. I used to sell packaging, and I designed a lot of stuff for Yeast. And then I worked for Yeast for about 4 years and kind of got tired of getting drunk with my buddies that worked there and saying, like, it'd be awesome if we did this. So I broke off, got out of my non-compete, started craft canning and bottling. I think we're going to do about 80,000 hec in package this year. And then, as I knew I needed to get out of non-compete and provide feed capital because I really wanted to own my own yeast lab. So I started craft basically to provide funding for Imperial. And then Jason, who was running the lab at Imperial, his buddy of mine, left Yeast and joined. And then we got Jess Cuddell, who'd been at Yeast 15, 16 years. He came on board, and I'm super excited to work with my friends again. We've been going about a year and a half now since our first full cook. We had about 3 years of working on the project, a year and a half of build out, and then about a year of organic certification, which isn't easy. And then we've been running for about a year. I think we've done about 5,000 barrels of wort production so far to feed our lab in a year and a half, and we're doing about 280 breweries and about 1,500 cans a week of yeast. So we started with about 85% of Yeast production capacity, and by the end of the month we'll exceed their production capacity. So one thing that we're different on is we're a completely open lab. So if you guys ever are in Portland, you can drop by anytime. We walk you through the whole thing. We don't hide anything. Everybody knows how to grow yeast. You guys grow yeast every time that you homebrew. People just don't know how to grow 55 strains of it a week. And that's really the secret to a yeast lab, is managing. It's like making 55 different beers a week and keeping them perfectly clean. But if you're planning on starting a yeast lab up, you're welcome to drop by. You can probably sneak around and get some photos. When I started it up, I wanted to do something organic. I wanted to do recyclable packaging, and I wanted to do a better cell count. It's a real thing. When I was a salesperson for Yeast, I would travel around the country teaching people about fermentation. Every once in a while, getting drunk with Tim, randomly. I just hear over and over and over again that I love my yeast on generation 2 or generation 3 from commercial guys. Like that's when it really hits its stride. And yeast doesn't magically become better at eating sugar on generation 2 or generation 3. You're just getting a big enough culture that the yeast is doing what it should do, getting true to style, flavor characteristics, consistent fermentations, fast takeoff time. And then when I looked at the homebrew market, and I homebrew a lot, I actually started home distilling a couple years ago, so I don't brew that much anymore. I just make whiskey. I saw on that side of the industry just underpitching and underpitching and underpitching. You know, White Labs is 58 billion cells per mil or per package. That's what they aim for. They don't concentrate or dilute their yeast, so it's depending on the cell size. You get sometimes up to about 78's the most, and on big cell yeast you'll get in the 40 billion cells. White yeast concentrates and dilutes, but it's 100 billion cells. I can tell you that every single white yeast internal homebrew competition, nobody brews with a single pack of yeast. It's not enough. So we decided to skip that both on the commercial and homebrew scale and actually give people the correct amount of yeast from the get-go. I figure I'm more effective at building starters than breweries or homebrewers. That's basically what we do all the time to incentivize that. I would love to make as much money as they do on yeast. It would be a lot less stress. I'd be less fat. We're a hell of a lot cheaper by sell than anybody else because I want to incentivize people using the right amount of yeast. I think as soon as they do that, they actually see what a true fermentation should be, and they'll just come back and come back and come back, and we'll earn customers forever. On the bottom of that piece of paper, that is my cell phone number. If you guys are ever having fermentation issues, questions, I answer probably 25 fermentation questions a week, pretty heavy on the weekend after people are drinking. You're more than welcome to do it. If you catch me when I'm drunk, the answer's probably going to be bullshit. But, you're welcome to call anytime with questions. Yeah?
So I understand the White Lab Sactois yeast provides like 2 billion cells, and I understand you have a similar yeast. How many cells does that have?
So everything we do is 200 billion cells on the commercial scale. So we
100 times.
The White Lab Sactois, they classify that. That's their Britannomyces, but it's not Brett. It's cyclohexamide sensitive. If you run it through a standard QC program, you know it's not Brett. You don't have to genotype it. Sorry, did anybody understand that?
Yep.
Do we know what we're talking about?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, open-ended questions. Who did not understand that? So White Labs had a strain that was classified as Britannomyces. As part of our QC process internally, we plate on different medias. And so we'll put a little bit of yeast and streak it out on, and depending on the media that we streak it out on, the media will let Saccharomyces grow, it will inhibit bacteria, it will inhibit wild yeast, some of the medias. And so based on where you grow it and what media it is, you can make an educated guess about what kind of infection you have in the beer. And White Labs had Brett Trois. It was pretty sexy a couple years ago. People are like, oh, I get ale fermentation times and it pushes fruit flavors and it doesn't act like Brett, but it's the thing, we really like the flavor characteristics. Yeah, it doesn't act like Brett because it's a wild Saccharomyces strain, it acts like Saccharomyces. We call that citrus. That's one of our core strains. Everything we do is 200 billion cells per mil. If you're going home, some of these are going back to our Canadian distributor, but welcome to take some of these home. If you're going out drinking and they're going to get warm, it's not worth it. No. I don't think it. I just grabbed what wasn't going out this week, what we had a lot of. That's our homebrew package. I wanted something recyclable. I wanted something that stood up on a shelf. I don't like the idea of millions of packages going in the landfill every year. You know, if you recycle a can, it's back in the product stream, getting made into a Diet Dr. Pepper can or something like that within 90 days. And it stands up pretty and it packs out really nice. I also wanted something that would give me the ability to pack a lot of yeast into a little area. So we have 200 billion cells in there. We're at 1.29 billion cells per mil as our lab density. So we concentrate or dilute everything that we grow. I guess I'll tell you how we grow real quick. So we have, our plant looks like a lab and a brewery mixed together. We have a really clean room, laminar flow hood, cell counting equipment, and we have a -80 fridge in there. We also have a -80 fridge off-site, and that's where we store our mother cultures. So there's no genetic drift at -80. The yeast is completely dormant. So Flagship, which is our Chico or 001 or 1056 strain, that's going to be the same today as it is 50 or 60 years down the road. And so once a quarter, we'll go into that -80 fridge and grab a couple cells, grow them up, and then grow those colonies up individually into working slants. And that's the beginning of every fermentation that we do. From working slants, they go into test tubes, they go into 200 mils, 500 mils, and we basically just continually build up the volume till we get to what we term brewery volumes, and then it goes out into the brewery floor where we have half barrel tanks, 1 barrel, 2 barrel, 4 barrel, 10 barrel, and 20 barrel. And depending on the order size that's coming in or the strain that we're growing, we'll size the tank to how much yeast we want to get out of it. Rough rule of thumb is every barrel of fermentation gives us 10 liters of yeast. So not a great business model. We drop 90% of what we make down the drain. So you grow it up, completely lost my train of thought at the beginning. I'll have another beer. Where was I going? Help me out, guys.
Concentration.
Thanks.
Oh, concentration. Awesome. Big tanks. That's exactly where we're going. So we harvest with temperature. We just crash the tanks, turn on the glycol, let it be, harvest over, you know, if it's pub, which is our fuller strain, it's cottage cheese, it drops out of suspension really fast. We can harvest that in 20 hours. If it's a Belgian wheat strain, it may take 2 harvests over 2 or 3 days to get the yeast out of it. Once we harvest it, yeast cells have really varying sizes. So 200 billion cells of a Saison strain to a American ale strain is probably the difference between 10% yeast by volume and 60% yeast by volume. So we think it's important to always give you the same amount of yeast across the board by any strain. We think yeast is like any other ingredient in brewing, that if you want consistent results, you need to have a consistent amount of it. It's a little harder to count yeast, but it's not that hard really. So we concentrate everything to 1.29 billion cells per mil. So we harvest it, concentrate it, we take cell counts, and then we'll either pour it off, and then we pour in distilled water or sterile water on top of that. So we're pouring off the spent beer, which has alcohol. So we decrease our alcohol and increase our pH, which are 2 big stressors on yeast. As part of that process, which nobody else does, so that keeps our yeast healthy longer than anybody else over time. Also make sure cans don't explode, which we had a little bit of issues with when we first started. This time last year was a very dark time in my life. So we concentrate to 1.29 billion cells per mil, 155 mils in each can. Your solid volume is going to vary inside that can. So if you're using pub, really good idea to have a sanitized spoon there to scrape it out, or to use more wort. I'll pitch as my wort chiller's coming out. You have a source of sterile wort, or you should at that stage. You'll pour it out and then just pour more wort into it, swish it around, get it out of the can. And honestly, spoons are a lot easier to sanitize than carboys. So if you're worried about infecting your yeast with a sanitized spoon, you're probably going to have issues in your carboy.
So that's why when you open the pub can, you'll see a real separation in the
Yeah, pub is
side.
yeah, that thing. You'll see our supernatant, which is a spent any residual true spent beer in our sterile water on top of it.
Right.
And you'll just see a cake on the bottom. It's super tough. And then if you go to like Monastic or Napoleon, our Belgian strains, really small cells, it's like milky and the whole thing pours out really easy. So when we have videos online and you see us pitching yeast, which are coming, we're using Monastic or something really easy.
I was worried when I had to scoop it out. I was just like, what's going on?
No, you know, I don't want to water it down, and I don't want to pay to ship water across the country. Without pub is actually what sets our lab density of that strain. It's a 1968 or 007 from White Labs. We have a conversion chart. Also, I can email up to you guys if you want. It's much better than Mr. Malty. We're 100% on the Y yeast strains, and we're probably 95% on the White Lab strains. And then we're 100% on the strains that we grabbed ourselves. Yeah, pub sets our lab density. That strain's a hell of, it's really tough to use. Kendra is Kendra's like, one of our lab techs is like 5'0", maybe 120 pounds soaking wet. And she, like, when we have 20-gallon carboys in the pub, she has to shake them for like 20 minutes to get them in, so she can get a count in it. And she just hates that strain. It's like one of the best sellers. So you're like, Kendra, we got another, 10 barrels worth of pub coming up. You get to shake carboys.
We've had our Conicals plug with that.
What was that?
We've had our Conicals plug.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Like, if we didn't have that strain, we would probably be at like 1.45 or 1.5 billion cells per mil. But people like to buy it, so it is what it is.
It's delicious.
Questions so far? Any of this?
In your reactors, your fermenters, are you pumping air in as you process, as the yeast is growing, or are you
Yes.
pumping in oxygen?
We use sterile air, not oxygen, and it's continually aerated.
I always wondered about what sort of efficiency of growing yeast you'd have if you had continuous aeration.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Actually, that is an excellent transition.
What's the question?
Yeah.
Aeration.
We'll see growth rates of 2 to 3 times. Like, it's part of our protocol that it's a checklist that you have to put your ear to the tank and be able to hear it rolling inside. If you can't hear it, you have to turn up the air to the tank, because that's a really easy way to get like a quarter of the yield that you're expecting out of the tank, which sucks. So, like, difference between stir plate and non-stir plate in your starters is about double. You need to double one of our cans on a stir plate. You need 2 liters of DME at 1040. Without a stir plate, you need 4 liters, and it's going to take half the time with a stir plate. Yeast really, really like oxygen to grow. Answer your question. Any other questions? Yeah.
Why sterile air over oxygen?
When you're continually aerating, you don't need to. So the reason that you use oxygen in the brewing process is it's going to negatively impact hops and other flavor compounds down the road. The beer that we make isn't even good enough for hobo booze, so we really don't care about that.
Okay.
And yeast, like, when you're brewing, you want to be at, like, in any of these tanks, you want to be at, say, 12 to 15 ppm as you're running. What we're breathing is 8 ppm, so you can't get there without pure oxygen in those tanks. But what they're doing is supercharging the first gen of yeast in those tanks, and then hoping that pulls through so they don't get any bad effects with oxygen throughout fermentation. Whereas with our process, we just want to keep the yeast in an aerobic growth state as long as possible, and so they just continually suck up that oxygen. Make sense?
Yep.
Am I lying yet? Maybe.
How does the minimum count work with your mixed strain? Like you have the sour batch?
Sour batch. I hate saying that word.
You need it.
Like yeast dominant, like it has just a combination?
Yeah. So how we name the strains, we can hand these guys out too. I brought stickers and swag. You guys want to pass those down so you can see the strains. Sour Batch Kids was named while I was on vacation. Normally our naming process is we sit around and we have 3 or 4 beers, and then we're allowed to talk about names. Sour Batch Kids, we use a low attenuated Belgian strain, so it's a Saison DuPont strain. That strain is garbage on its own. It's a beautiful flavor profile, but it sucks out at like 10:30, and you can't get it to finish. So we know it's going to leave a lot of residual sugar behind. And then, so it's a little bit of that, a lot of lacto, and a lot of Brett. On Sour Batch, there's a lot more than 200 billion cells in there. So, but it's split up between a bunch of different stuff. And that's a blend of 2 Lambicus Brett's, lacto, hop intolerant lacto, and Saison DuPont strain.
What's the lifespan of the cans?
We say 3 months. At 3 months, so there's like, I'll get an email or 2 a week, and it's like, hey, Mr. Malty says blah, 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 or I need to know the exact amount of cells that are going to be alive after 2.5 months in my fridge. Really anything I say is going to be alive on that. Rule of thumb is fresh yeast is better. We have 200 billion viable cells in packaging. Some strains look superb after 3 months, like high 90% viability. Some strains look at like 50%, 60% viability after that. Lager strains don't like to live, and then how it's stored as well. So if it was, yeast have a little bit of internal sugar when they go dormant, and if they ever get subjected to above 70 degrees Fahrenheit, what is that, like 18, 20? They'll start waking up and using those internal sugar reserves, and then they won't have any reserves to open their cell walls. Like they open it up and there's no sugar in the can for them to replenish, and that'll really stress your culture out, and that's where we see significant drop-offs in long-term viability really quickly, is if the yeast was ever abused, if it ever spiked in temp, even if you're storing it. And then, you know, are you storing it at 33.5, are you storing it at 45, 48, 50? Like, there's a shop in Portland that had their yeast right next to their bottle shop, and it was right next to the beer in the same fridge. And so people would open it up, and on the weekends, everybody's going in and opening up. That fridge was 65 degrees, so every weekend it would spike in temperature. And we had some issues with that. So we needed to move the yeast to a different fridge. So honestly, it's how the yeast is handled, and it's strain dependent as well, in terms of what's going to live. In general terms, Belgians are pretty early. They can take whatever. We don't really care. Lagers are the other end of it. And American British strains are kind of in the middle.
Is there any benefit to throwing it in the freezer instead of the
No.
fridge?
So you don't want to freeze yeast. It doesn't kill too much of it, but it does kill some. There's water inside the can. When you freeze it, water creates sharp crystals that'll pierce some cell walls, and that'll release the sugar that's inside the can, inside the cell. The other cells will suck it up. When they warm up, it's just, You don't want to freeze your yeast. Like, perfect is 33 degrees. If you have it, like, we do our testing, we usually copy a standard shipment where we put it in a box like that. We leave it outside, or somebody drives it around in their car for 2 days, copy FedEx, and then we'll bring it back and store it at 33 degrees, and then do testing at 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, and do that by strain. So, answer your question?
Yeah.
Awesome. Anything else?
What was the push behind organic, like the organic sugar?
I'm friends with Hopworks and I'm friends with Laurelwood. They wanted, if you don't do something as your standard process, you're never going to do it. And we make one wort stream, so we make one beer over and over and over again. We figured out a way to do that organically, where it's only 4 to 5% more expensive than if we didn't do it organically, and we're getting good growth rates and healthy yeast out of it. It took about a year of bench trials to do it, but we just wanted, if we could do something better and handle our process in an environmentally sensitive way, we thought we should. Probably 10% of our clients are really excited that it's the last part of their beer that is not organic. They can close that loop, and they're super stoked with it. There's probably 40% of our clients, or 50%, that are excited to have part of their process be more environmentally friendly, and then there's probably 40% that don't give a shit.
I was wondering, just
Yeah.
from a cost, like,
Yeah,
sort of
it-
business model side thing, like, I wonder,
Yeah, business model side was pretty damn stupid. It was a pain. It took us over a year. Organic certification was awful because they didn't know what we were doing, and basically they only print our cans twice a year, and like we missed one print, we're coming up on the second one, and it had just been downhill where they're asking all these ridiculous questions, and you're like, it's not a food product, man. Nobody eats this immediately. You shouldn't drink active yeast. Yeah, if you really need to poop. A couple glasses of orange juice and a can of yeast. See, I told you this would be a subpart, right? Get stuck on drinking yeast every time. I was at GABF and we had a big thing of yeast, and I got people to drink it one night. It was still one of the highlights of my brewing career. Poor bastards. Or from a business side of things, it's not great. It costs us more money, and I don't think we still have a lot of organic breweries that are using organic as a way to sell their beer for more and not rely on their organic certification. And they call us up once a year and they're like, my brewer says you don't make yeast in the quantity that we need it. I'm like, well, we do. And they're like, well, he says you don't. Well, I'm sitting in the yeast lab right now. Do you want me to say that we don't? And they're like, yeah. Okay, we don't. That's fine.
they're looking for
I'm fine
excuse
with
not to buy, essentially? Or?
Yeah, they don't want to, if you're organic certified, it's a ton of paperwork, and you're required to use organic certified ingredients unless it is not produced in the form or quantity required. And you have to go through a organic certification yearly. And we have a lot of people that are like, oh, well, we just do organic beer so we can charge more for it. We don't want to change our yeast strain. All right, cool, whatever. What makes it organic is just how we handle it. We're a DME house. We don't have a brewery on site. We have a pressure kettle. Boiling isn't sterile. You can't kill mold until about 240 degrees. So we cook at 20 psi and 240. It's DME organic sugar. I think we're the biggest buyer of organic grease DME in the world now. And then all of our nutrients need to be mined instead of synthesized, which is tough. And then all of our cleaning chemicals need to be on an approved list. And then when Oregon Tilth really pisses you off and messes with your business, you just need to get really fucking angry and aggressive with them. Be like, look guys, like, I feel that you're retarded and we've been going down the wrong path for 2.5 months and I have to send another email, I'm gonna be really pissed off. I'm gonna miss my print window for the cans. And they're like, oh, well, what's your production day? And I was like, Monday. And they're like, oh, okay. They wrote us, so I got the organic certification like that. All I needed to be was stop being like a passive aggressive Portlander and just like push back on these motherfuckers. We get our organic certification. So they're actually pretty good to deal with once you're up and running. It's something different and people get scared of something new. See, I think we went over a bunch of this, right? Blah, blah, blah. First part is math, right? Yeah.
I understood there would be no math.
Yeah. Stir plate, starters, all starters. This is just, I'll go over a couple things real quick to try to, if some of it sticks, your beer might be better, both homebrew and commercial. If you're doing starters, 1 can is good for about up to 18 Play-Doh. If you do a lager, and this is in 5 gallons, 20 liters. If you're doing a lager and your first couple days are at ale temperature, so warm ferment at the beginning of lager, same pitch rate works. We aim for 0.75 million cells per mil per degree Play-Doh across the board. Who doesn't understand that? Awesome.
Can I put up my hand for that?
You can put up your hand too. That's easy enough. If you're going to do a starter, if you're brewing multiple batches and don't want to buy multiple cans, that's perfectly fine. We just care that you get the right amount of yeast in your beer, or your cider, or whatever you're doing. Starters, always 1040, always 70 degrees, 72, whatever that is, quick.
20.
20. So, 22. I got yelled at last time I did this presentation for not having Celsius on it, so yesterday I went and put Celsius on it. Don't do high gravity starters. Yeast doesn't get used to alcohol in 1 generation. You're just going to stress out your beer. Stir plate is basically going to double the speed of growth, and per gram of sugar, it's going to double the amount of yeast cells that you get. If you're doing a 1 liter starter, it's not worth it. You're just going to stress your culture out. As soon as your starter hits terminal gravity, you want to pitch it or you want to refrigerate it. Don't leave it on a stir plate for 14 hours with a lot of oxygen and no sugar available. It's an easy way to beat your culture out.
How long will that stir plate then?
It's going to depend on what you're doing and your cells. It's well worth taking a gravity reading. It's worth the loss of cells to know where you are in your fermentation, in your starter. So it's well worth pouring it out and taking a gravity reading. Harvesting. Does anybody have conicals here? Couple. Okay. If you have conicals, blow off your tube, harvest the cream in the middle. You can do about 155 mils, the same amount of yeast that we give you, without a conical. If you want to reuse your yeast, rack your beer off your yeast, leave say an inch of it on top, homogenize it. It's the best you can do without a conical. So at the very bottom you have your older cells and most of the early die-offs. The middle's a cream, then the top is younger or different ones. So you just homogenize it so you're getting an even amount of that throughout. And we're going to recommend harvesting in 200 mil batches. You can either do it by weight or by graduated cylinder on there. 200 mils is probably going to equal pretty close to 200 million cells. Don't store it in glass, store it in plastic, and loosen the lid every couple days. CO2 pressure will really hurt your strain over time. Keep it in the fridge, not the freezer. Use it within about 2 weeks.
Why not glass?
Joe, why not? Yeah, right.
Because if you put it in there before you finish fermentation, it'll blow up.
So as long as the lid's loose enough, you
Yeah, if you can use glass if you're using like sanitized aluminum foil over the top.
Yeah.
If you're using a mason jar with a screw down lid, the jar will break before the lid does. We will not accept samples from commercial breweries in glass at our shop. We've had too many of them explode. Safety's the answer to that. I just taught you how to spend less money on yeast.
Thank you.
Any questions on that?
Cheers.
Yeah, if I was growing up with a slant or small yeast to weird, what are the steps?
Usually less than multiples of 10 is best. 24 hours per growth in multiples of 5 is decent to look at. So 1 mil to 5 mils, 5 mils to 25, 25 to 125, all the way up in about 24 hours. Depends on if you have to play that stuff. If you're doing it and you're growing up yourself, if you shoot us an email, we can send you over a process or link you into ASBC website. All right. VDK test, diacetyl testing. Anybody know this?
Talk us through it.
Okay. Really easy way to make sure you never have diacetyl in your beer. What you do is before you crash it with temperature, when you think it's done, you take 2 little samples out. You heat one sample up to 155. I'm not even gonna guess on that one. Yeah, it's pretty fucking warm, like a minute and a half in the microwave. Technical. You want to hold it there, minimum of 10 minutes. That heat is going to force the conversion of the precursors of diacetyl into diacetyl. And then you cool it down and you smell both samples. If both of them smell buttery, you got a really long ways to go. If the heated one smells buttery, sooner or later diacetyl is going to come out in your beer. It's like being pregnant. You're not a little bit pregnant. It's going to come out sooner or later. If both of them smell clean, you're good to go. And usually by the time you've cleaned up your diacetyl, you've cleaned up your acetaldehyde and a couple other things in there too. Everybody get that? Question? Super easy test to run on a commercial scale. There should be no reason. I mean, everybody likes to say they're really sensitive to it. It's really easy off flavor to pick up. Everybody knows that taste, the buttered popcorn. Really easy to make sure you never have that in your beer. It's 10 minutes to do that test. I mean, it works on a stovetop. You can also just microwave it. It's usually pretty immediate on the transformation. A forced ferment test. It's a good way to tell if you have issues from hot side or cold side on your grains. So if you're having issues with attenuation, really good test to run. You can pull off a little bit, over pitch it and keep it warm, put it on your stir plate, basically forcing growth of that strain. So this is with your wort. So when you're racking off 5 gallons, you're gonna pull half a liter of that out. Put it on the stir plate, over pitch it with yeast. You can save yeast cake from it. It really doesn't matter the yeast strain as long as it's not Napoleon. Attenuation doesn't really matter. Almost every strain, it's the hot side and how you cook in your grains that matter for attenuation more than the yeast strain itself. So you're basically forcing that to grow, and then you can take a gravity reading in 24 to 48 hours, and that's going to tell you kind of a best case scenario of what that beer is going to be able to get down to. So if you're doing a big barley wine or any Christmas beers, you can do that, and then you'll know that, hey, my sample got down to 1014. In the fermenter, we're down to 1030 and it's stalling out. We need to do something on the yeast side. My sample got down to 1045. In the fermenter, it got down to 1045. That's as much as the yeast can do. It's not going to do anything else. So it's just an easy test to be able to troubleshoot if you're going to have hot side issues, so mash, or cold side issues. Wort stability. It's kind of a scary one to do. If you can keep your wort clean on a homebrew scale for 72 hours, you're a champion. All you're doing is taking a sanitized vessel, pulling off some of your wort, capping it, and putting it in a warm place for 72 hours. And you're looking for turbidity or CO2 production. And what you're doing is just getting another process stream out so you can check to see how clean you were up to that point. And if 6 hours later, if what's bubbling in there starts bubbling before your fermenter, you're probably going to have some bad beer. And then this one, not many people are going to have sodium hydroxide around, but if you're worried about flocculation, and you're like, hey, my beers never clear up, the yeast doesn't flock out. If you go to a brewery, you can grab caustic from them. You grab two 50 ml tubes, put 40 mils of beer in each, put 2 mils of sodium hydroxide. You want to wear safety glasses and gloves, that stuff will eat through your skin. And then shake it up, and you have to use plastic tubes for that, or it'll eat through other stuff. If it clears up, it is what? Somebody has to be able to read.
I don't have one in front of its protein.
Yeah. Anybody? Let's make this interactive.
This is still there.
If it doesn't clear, what happens if it doesn't clear?
Oh, that's protein yeast.
Are we sure?
Then there's still yeast in the beer.
Yeah. So if it clears, there's protein. If it doesn't clear, it's yeast. So if you're worried about flocculation, your beers will turn out super muddy. If you run this test and it doesn't clear up, yeah, you need to choose a strain that ferments out better, or give it more time to drop out of suspension. If it does drop out, it does clear up, it's protein, and you can look at the other side and how much protein you're doing and change your malt recipe, stuff like that if you're trying for clarity. All that's just a little tiny test, takes less than probably a liter of wort to run. And if you do that as gospel, your beers will turn out a lot better. Miss anything? I don't know. I think I'm losing some of you. Some people stopped listening a while ago. Any other questions?
What's the biggest homebrew use of all besides the
Oxygen. Yeah, lack of O2.
like getting better?
Yeah, that's the same. If you underpitch, if you like triple your oxygen, you can usually make up for it. Or if things are stalling or not taking off, you can do multiple additions of oxygenation. If you're doing a really, really big beer, it's better to oxygenate at hour 24 and maybe hour 36. There's not a lot of flavor compounds produced that early in fermentation. So you can kind of energize the mother and the daughter cells, get that first division, have them build up their cell walls again. And you do that so they can power through, a 10% beer, and they're not going to stall out on that last % or two and have to chug in a really toxic environment and kick out a lot of off flavors. So you're basically running the risk of a little oxidation of flavor compounds at the beginning, so you don't get off flavors at the end. Low O2 is buying a little O2 setup from your local homebrew shop. It's an easy way to make your fermentations go a lot smoother. Yeah.
I'm just wondering how it works about why yeast Imperial, the smack pack idea that you were last about sort of adding food for the yeast versus just canning. Is there a perceived advantage to going over?
Yeah, well, you can tell if your yeast is alive or dead or not. It's pretty easy to beat up your culture with the smack pack. Like on our cans, we say store cold and pitch cold. Thermal shock is bullshit, doesn't exist. Yeast can take a really big jump in temperature really quickly. Proof of the pudding is every single craft brewery is basically pitching cold cone to cone, which means they're pitching cold yeast into warm wort over and over and over again. It doesn't hurt the yeast. On the smack pack, what you're doing is giving us a little bit of food, so the yeast, when they hit wort, they're in a metabolically active stage, is what they're doing with that. That's a way to make up for not giving you enough yeast. It's, for big online retailers, it's nice for them to ship it out and have somebody be able to smack it and see it expand and know that it works. Now, there's only 35 mils of yeast in 35 mils of wort in that pack, and there's 95 mils of slurry in there. So the yeast is going to go through that sugar really, really quickly. So what you want to do is, if you're using smack packs, you want to smack it and then pitch it very quickly afterwards. If it's out for 3 hours, that yeast is going to be starving. You're going to start to beat up your culture. So, I mean, if yeast can go through 2 liters of wort in 24 hours, yeast is going to go through 35 mils of wort really, really quickly. So it's just a way to, it's a nice fail-safe for online shipping. If you're buying stuff from Minnesota and you're shipping it to Texas in the middle of the summer, and it got delayed and it's been outside, lager yeast dies at 91 degrees. That's one of the differentiators between it and ale yeast. If it got above 91 degrees, lager yeast started to die. It's nice to be able to tell it's alive. I think it's nice to buy your yeast from a local shop where you trust the people that are doing it, or an online shop where you know that they're moving it, and then make sure that it's as fresh as possible and use it well.
So that really puts a lie to the practice many years ago when I sold raw yeast packages. Customers would phone us and ask us to smack the pack the day before they came in to purchase it.
Yeah, it's a really easy way to beat up the culture. What they're doing is they know there's not a lot of yeast in that pack left alive. So if they're at 100 billion cells and 35 mils of yeast, or 20 billion cells and 30 mils of yeast, that's going to be different times to eat the available sugar. Like, I don't want the yeast to wake up until they are in, and we work extremely hard at making sure they go dormant at the right time. We batch feed everything. We know how much sugar they're going to eat by strain within 24 hours or 36 hours, and we feed them accordingly by strain. So it's really important not to have them go to sleep at the right time, and then it's really important for them to complete their division cycle so they don't get halfway through a metabolic process and run out of food and be like, hey dude, what the fuck's up? This is not cool. They don't really talk, but.
Is there an ideal starter size for cell count? Like, is there a conversion?
Too big a question. Just give me a call when you're doing it. Be like, hey, 3 of us got together and we bought 1 can of yeast and we're going to split it evenly.
You've worked with homebrewers before.
Yeah. One of us is in like 6 liters and one of us is doing 150 liters. Like, it's going to be different size starters. Rough rule of thumb is I don't like to expand over 10 times the amount of, so 1 liter of yeast. You don't want to go over 10 times the volume in growth. So if you're having 155 mils, you don't want to end up with more than 1,050 mils of yeast or whatever that is. My math is way off. I'm sure that's completely wrong. We're more than happy to help. I answer these questions all the time. It's usually a pretty quick call, and it's like, hey man, I got this strain. I'm doing a 60-liter batch. And it's how much time do you have as well. Hey, I'm brewing tomorrow. I got a 60-liter batch, and I got 1 can of yeast. Go buy more cans. Just think about how happy I'll be. My children will be able to. Or it's like, hey, you're gonna underpitch. We know you're gonna underpitch. Let's work on the oxygen side of things to make up for that in the first 24 hours of fermentation. So, I'm happy to run over it if you have your specific batch size now, or if it's just a question in general. General, it's if you have a stir plate, 2 liters. 2 liters is going to double it, and most people that double are brewing 10-gallon batches. Or when you're doing you know, 1 can is good up to 18 Plato. And 1 can, so at 20 Plato, I have the same pitch rate of white yeast at 10 Plato and white labs at 6 Plato. You know, a lot of people are gonna be brewing 10-gallon batches and just buy 1 can of yeast and save some money, and they're gonna be pretty stoked about that, and their beer's gonna be fun. It's just, you know, I have 2 kids and 3 businesses. Like, if I take time out of my day to brew, I want to brew a really nice beer. I don't want to brew a substandard beer unless I'm trying to piss off my club.
Which people do.
Yeah, no, I got a guy named Tim.
Does he wear a kilt?
He gets super hammered every time, and I got him for like 6 months straight in meetings. I made like a big stout that didn't ferment all the way, and it was just bottle bombs. Be like, hey Tim, open this for me. I opened it out 6 months. One of my crowning achievements in life. Yeah.
Where are your products available, and what is the price on a 10?
We have we have a brand new website today where you can check it out. But Beyond the Grape is currently our only Canadian distributor.
Whoa,
Hey! Price?
They are $12.95.
Okay.
Better than Smack Pack.
By sell, I'm dirt cheap. When you start doing math, I'm dirt cheap.
I work go for $10.50, so for $2.50 more or $2.45 to be exact.
3
Getting
times the amount.
a hell of a lot more.
Yeah, we purposely don't make as much money on yeast because I want to incentivize everybody using the right amount. It's an immediate, it's not rocket science. I mean, this stuff has been out there for 35 years, and to like what correct pitch rates do for beer, it's just nobody's doing it yet, and it kind of pissed me off that I was helping that out.
I also have a bunch here that you guys can buy if you want. At a discount too, I'll give you guys 10%
Thanks.
Do you guys do, besides the sort of regular lead, do you do seasonals, or is that something that you work with?
Yeah, we do. I mean, we're like 7 people right now.
Yeah. So it's not
It's
like
crazy. Not yet. I'm gonna be bigger than everybody soon. Yeah, I want to take over the world. What? You know, we just did a batch of the Norwegian Farmhouse, their Kvik strain. I don't know, it, like on Milk the Funk and other websites, they go nuts on, like, the Norwegians and Scandinavians go nuts on their farmhouse ale. And they're like, oh, it's stored at 90 degrees. And you're like, bullshit, it never gets to fucking 90 degrees in Norway. That entire premise is wrong. You guys don't have summer, you have warm winter. But they're like, oh, it's stored in, like, you know, Farmer Lars straw hat, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh, whatever. But, we got a batch of that in, we grew that up. We're growing up a secondary DuPont strain right now, which we call Agrarian, which is a nice white wine character. For Saisons, I think that's probably going to be the next big Saison strain next year. Every commercial brewery that has brewed with it has just raved about it and seen it go and go and go. We have Safari, which is a good reason never to let a brewery name a yeast strain. It's Hopworks Brewery, and the Safari Club is right next door in Portland. That was the last time we left brewery named strain. So we do have those, and it's basically, we grew it up, we grow up, and then it's sent out to our shops. We'll send out an email and be like, hey, we have, 500 cans of this strain, and this is the grape characteristics, and see if it sticks. At some stage, we'll get our act together to have an actual something. Seasonal calendar. We'll do it, but we've done a couple different breads. We switch our bread, we switch our sour batch out once or twice a year too.
The sour batch, which is straight.
No, sour batch is a couple Brett's, lacto, and a low attenuated Saccharomyces strain.
I've got a question about your cans.
Yeah.
So I know pressure can affect the way yeast ferments.
Yes.
Do you find it gives you an advantage in terms of storage and able to handle higher temperatures longer, that sort of thing? If you do, I don't see your cans are terribly pressurized, but does that give you options?
So when we started, we liquid nitrogen dosed every can and brought it up to 20 psi. That was a really bad idea.
Noted.
We basically, because we didn't get our organic certification, we lost out on 6 months of training with the cans and testing. And so we were flat broke by the time the cans came in and we had to throw them out there. And that was a really bad idea as well.
So the pressurized wasn't?
Yeah, pressure is actually a really negative thing for yeast.
Oh, it is.
When you get up there, it will, when our cans get firm, it's a sign of off-gassing, and that's usually a sign of some yeast dying and releasing residual CO2 in solution. Now there's some strains like Flagship, the 001 1056, that hold a ton of CO2 in solution anyway, so that's not really it, but it's also a sign you don't want to shake your yeast can. I should probably open one.
That's good to know.
So yeah, so we can do the smart way and the dumb way if you really want. You know, 2 cans, about the same. Shaking stuff never really works out well.
Nobody get that can.
So you guys brought this nice new AV equipment. So you want to vent the can first, so you're not opening it, you're not just pouring it, pulling the cap off completely. So you vent it, pop, and go. So normally you pull it out of the fridge. What I do is I invert the can at the beginning of the brew day. So yeast drops down. Right before I brew, pull it out, sanitize it, drop it in Sani, pop it, let it equalize, pull the top off. I'll pour out some of the wort and then swirl it until you see the yeast cake lift up in the bottom. And as you swirl, you'll see CO2 come out of solution. So, that's Joystick, which is the Pac-Man strain. And then this is what, Urkel, that's Pilsner Urkel. You can see the difference of it. So.
I got 20 bucks.
I'm willing to pitch in on that.
Come with the roll of
And
toilet
you can
paper.
see, so normally you'd pour a little out in there, but that's what's left in there. You can get most of it out pretty easy. I wouldn't shake it. Not a good thing to do. Just invert the can and then pour a little sterile wort in. Don't be afraid of spooning it out. Like I said, a spoon is easier. I dream about like running a chili company or like a tuna fish company. Like I don't think I would get angry emails on Sunday, be like, I couldn't get the yeast out of the can, so I threw it away, and you ruined my brew day, and blah blah blah. And you're like, I don't think like people get angry at Hormel chili or starfish tuna. Like, I couldn't get the tuna out of the can, so I decided to throw it away, and I hate you. You ruined my brew day. I'm just trying to hang out with my daughters, man, and I gotta deal with this shit. You'll see it. The stuff on top doesn't have. That's where we run into most of our issues is education on how to actually use the can. We'll have people just pour the top off it, and they're like, "Oh, there's a bunch of white stuff in the bottom. I just threw it away." I'm like 24 hours in, and nothing's really happening. Yeah, that's not good. Any other questions? Awesome. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.